The Columbus flood of 1913 was a tragedy. Still today, it remains the largest weather disaster Ohio has ever experienced.
My name is Mary Nichols, and I was born on February 2nd, Groundhog's Day, 1930. I know everything my mother told me, and she was very definitely in it with her entire family.
It all started with 9 tornadoes in the Gulf states of Alabama, Georgia, and Mississippi.
Well, the flood was on the west side of Columbus, Ohio, and I was born in downtown Columbus at a hospital called Mercy Hospital, which is no longer there.
On March 23, 1913, storms of high winds and sleet traveled closer until they entered the Ohio River Valley.
They lived on Martin Avenue on the west side, and the flood came right across where they lived.
On the 24th, thunderstorms caused 3 to 8 inches of flooding in Ohio.
Her father, my grandfather, was a baggage master, and he was out on a run, so he wasn't there.
On the 25th, the levee burst and the city of Columbus began to flood.
But when he got back, they could see across to the houses. And by that time, my mother's family had crawled next door across the plank because the house next door was made of brick, and their house was a frame house. So they thought the brick house would hold up better than their house and that they would be safer. So they went over there. So there was no sign of life in their house. And when the father came up, looked over there, he thought his whole family was dead.
On the 26th, the flood continued, accompanied by fires and gas explosions from buildings that were destroyed.
The oldest sister, my mother's older sister, was in the hospital giving birth to a baby.
Oh my God.
By candlelight. Wow. During the flood, and because there was no electricity. They had no food for 4 or 5 days. And she told me that up the street from them, there was a livery stable. And they watched the poor man trying to swim out his horses. And he also got a rowboat and tried to pull them out. Some of them, I guess, he saved, but not all of them, because one of them washed down and took the porch right off my mother's house. Just took it right away. They just said he didn't survive. Asked her if they went back to their house, and she said there wasn't any house to go back to. That they had, the only thing they were able to rescue was the great big black cast iron stove. And for years and years after that, every once in a while there'd be a clunk, and my grandmother would say, "Oh, there goes another chunk of mud out of the stove."
Wow.
So that's all they were able to save.
On the 27th and 28th, the Red Cross began to save people by boat while the flood died down.
Oh, I think, and of course, the dam had to be rebuilt, and the entire west side had to be rebuilt. All the homes there were washed away, including my mother.
Damage from the flood exceeded $73 million in Columbus.
Just the realization that if Mother had not been able to crawl across that 9-inch wide plank, which was 15 feet long, across this swirling floodwater without, and she was only 8. She said she kind of panicked and sat up in the middle of the plank and locked her legs under it and had to be talked into lying back down, and so they could pull her across the plank. But if she had panicked and fallen off, we wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be here, and neither would you, and I'm just glad she was such a brave little girl.
Yeah.
Thinking that if she had not been so brave, I wouldn't be here. That's kind of startling. The things that affected us that way. Well, there have been other floods. There was the Johnstown flood. I don't think sometimes we realize how devastating floods can be. We are more likely to think that fires are more devastating, but floods can be just as. It affected a fairly minimal amount of people, just the people that lived in Columbus and primarily on the west side. And as they gradually died, I mean, it was, after all, 102 years ago. Stories kind of die along with them, although so long as their children remember and tell the stories, then they will live.
Over 450 people in Columbus died during the flood. All over America, more than 250,000 people were left homeless. We were out there about 5 days. After the water went down, all my toys and dolls were gone. About all that we were able to salvage was the great big iron stove. We never went back there to live. The whole area had to be rebuilt.